Okay, so hi everyone, I'm Miriam. I'm with Mahaska County Soil and Water Conservation District. My colleague Bryce Litka and myself are really glad to host that meeting today. So really hope that you're gonna enjoy it. Just before we start, I'd like just to state a few rules just to make sure that everything goes smoothly. Please stay muted at all time. You will have the chance to unmute yourself when there will be a period of questions. We will have two period of questions after each presentation. So after Josh Divan's presentation and after Joe. So at any time, please feel free, go ahead and type your question into the chat box, and during the period of question, we'll address your questions. Or you can simply say, hey, I have a question for Josh, and then we will invite you to unmute yourself and ask your questions. So I think that's it. At the end, we will invite you to fill an appreciation survey. We'll post the link in the chat box, but don't worry, we're gonna remind you at the end. Well, before we start, I want to say a big thanks to Iowa Corn, our sponsor. It's always a pleasure to collaborate with Iowa Corn. And we have Ben Gleason with us today. So Ben, if you would like, please introduce yourself and your organization.
I'm Ben Gleason. I'm the Senior Manager for Sustainability at Iowa Corn. Happy to be here and happy to help out in any way. So Iowa Corn is the Iowa Corn Promotion Board. So we have a board of directors. They administer the corn checkoff, and we use those dollars for research, education, and market development. You know, on the conservation side, we do a lot of educational outreach to farmers to encourage the adoption of conservation practices. So happy to sponsor events like this. We've also been giving out nitrate test kits for a few years now, and I added up the numbers a couple weeks ago, and we've done well over 1,500 of those kits to farmers and landowners and other people across the state. So that's continues to have a lot of demand on that as people are trying to figure out where to target practices or things of that nature. And also sponsor a lot of field days. And really looking forward to hopefully a more normal summer, and potentially the biggest summer for field days ever, I feel like, with everybody being cooped up. So if you guys want to host a field day, I don't care where it is, let us know. We'd be happy to help out. And then the other side of Iowa Corn is the Iowa Corn Growers Association. So members pay dues to be part of the organization. Most of it's does the lobbying side, because checkoff dollars cannot be used for lobbying. So the Growers Association handles the policy side, and we've got government relations staff that lobby on behalf of farmers. And one of our longtime policies that we lobby on every year is increased funding for cost share programs. We know that there are never enough dollars to go around, and there's always a backlog of applications. So every year, and then actually this year, it's again, one of our priorities is to maintain or increase funding for the nutrient reduction strategy and the water quality initiative and all those things. So happy to be here, happy to help sponsor, and again, looking forward to warmer weather in the summer when we can get outside and do these things in person. So thanks a lot.
Thank you, Ben. Big time thank you to Ben and Iowa Corn and for sharing everything that you guys are doing. Maybe you guys RSVP'd for this event, and if you did, you probably received a popcorn, microwavable bag, some M&Ms, and a nitrate test kit. Iowa Corn was they were happy to partner alongside of us in making this happen in this virtual field day. So again, thank you to Iowa Corn for doing that and all the conservation efforts. I also want to thank Pheasants Forever and NRCS for partnering along with this to make this happen. We have 2 guest speakers today, and each of them are super knowledgeable. I can't wait to hear what they're going to talk about, and it's going to be good stuff. I'm going to share a little bit about my watershed project. So I'm the watershed coordinator for the South Skunk River. My name's Bryce. I'm gonna share a screen with you guys really quickly. Yeah, share that one. Let me know if you guys see this all right.
Yep, we got it, Bryce.
Oh yeah, okay. So like I said, the South Skunk and Cedar Creek watershed. If you haven't liked or followed our Facebook page, I'm gonna ask you to go ahead and do that on Facebook at South Skunk. WP stands for Watershed Project. And that's a good little thing to do because we're sending out constant updates on cost share opportunities available, what's going on in conservation practices in your area, and just good information for you to be in the know and be on the receiving end of conservation practices, benefits. So our watershed project is a water quality initiative project. And what that means is it's a statewide effort, but we're a local effort within the Mahaska County, but funded by the statewide efforts to reduce the nutrients in our surface water from point sources and non-point sources. Point sources are things that you can point to and be like, okay, like that wastewater facility is causing pollution in our water. Non-point sources are things that are more general across the land. So like farming would be an example of a non-point source. And the goal is to reduce these nutrient runoff by 45% overall. And how we do that is through these practices called the nutrient reduction strategy practices. And this just gives like a list of things that we really push out there that we want to cost share and provide technical and financial assistance with and just help you out. That's a quick little list. And you may be wondering, where is this watershed? What is the boundary? Do I fall in it? And here's a quick map of the watershed project. The big one again is Mahaska County, and the grayed out areas is the non-watershed area, and the clear aerial view is our watershed project. So you can see Oskaloosa there in the middle, and Highway 63 going through it. Now you may not be within Mahaska County, maybe you're somewhere else in the state, and so I included this other map to the left that shows other water quality initiative areas throughout the state. So those red zones are the areas, and that yellowed out area is our little sliver here in Mahaska County of the South Skunk River. So our watershed project is about 139, close to 140,000 acres. And we cost share a lot of things like I alluded to earlier. The things that we're talking about today in terms of boosting your profitability by taking out non-profitable areas, things that we cost share with for that include like perennial cover, wetlands, prairie strips, grassed waterways, filter strips. And the last one, filter strips, I want to hit on. Maybe you watch this field day and you're like, oh, wow, I think I can use this information to find an area of my land along the edge of the field. Maybe it's next to a stream. A filter strip, CRP filter strip would be perfect for that because you'll not only be gaining, you'll be getting a payment for the CRP, but also there's a next level supplemental practice right underneath it called a saturated buffer strip. And that saturated buffer strip is a good practice to reduce nitrates in the water quality in the tile line. And we actually cost shared the saturated buffer strip at 100% on the sites that we can that fit the saturated buffer strip. And so if you're a conservation leader, I just highly encourage you to look into things like that. Maybe you're considering a saturated buffer strip today or another big practice. But my contact information is at the bottom left corner, bryce.lidka@ia.nacdnet.net. And the first person to email me their shirt size is going to get one of these bad boys, a free t-shirt that has the South Skunk Watershed logo in this nice crystal clear blue t-shirt color. It says Clean Water Mahaska on the back. And this is a fine material, guys. You want this shirt. So go ahead and shoot me your size and I'll let you know who the winner is. With that, I'm going to toss it over to Miriam to talk about her watershed project.
Yeah, thank you, Bryce. I don't have any t-shirt to give. I'm sorry. Maybe I should think about that. So yeah, I'm Miriam Lafrenière, and I am also, like Bryce, a watershed coordinator with Mahaska County Soil and Water Conservation District. And my watershed is the Michiganuk Creek. So I'm gonna show you my watershed here on the screen. I'm not sure. Are you seeing that? I hope I share the right screen.
Yeah, we can see it, Miriam.
Okay, thank you. I wasn't sure. Okay, so this is my watershed, the Michiganuk Creek watershed. The creek flows from Pella down to Eddyville, where it reaches the Des Moines River, and the South Skunk River is just here to the south. So it's been it's been a successful watershed project. It's been going on for 15 years. In the past, we mostly cost-share sediment control structures like basins, terraces, and ponds. But more and more, we're trying to include also practices for soil health, like cover crops, for example, and also edge of the field practices to remove excessive nitrogen in water. Like, for example, wetland, prairie strip, saturated buffer, and bioreactor. So what I find with that, when I work with farmers and landowners, is they sometimes they're a little bit reluctant to give their crop ground, to install these practices on their land. But sometimes when I dig a little bit further, talking with them, we realize that these grounds are not always their best ones. Sometimes it's going to yield very well one year and then it's flooded the next one, or maybe it's on these steep slopes that are hard to farm or too dry, or it's in a little corner and where it's hard to maneuver and precisely do good seed placement. So it's why that we're quite excited to partner with Josh Divan today, because he with the precision agriculture approach, he can really unlock these your field maps and these farm data and really tell you precisely what it takes, where that would make sense to install these conservation practices. So it's why I'm very happy to introduce you to Josh Divan, ag precision specialist with Pheasants Forever. And Josh, go ahead. Thank you.
Perfect. Well, I just want to start off by thanking you, Miriam, and Bryce for organizing this event. We had, like everybody, had hoped to do something in person, but 2020 had other plans for us. So this is a neat compromise, though. So I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to try to share my screen here. Okay. Let me see what are you seeing?
We see your screen.
You see okay, perfect.
Yep.
So jumping right in here. My name is Josh Divan. I work with Pheasants Forever, precision ag and conservation specialist. I'm up in north central Iowa, but I cover the entire state. So what I'm going to talk about today is going to be, and Miriam and Bryce have already alluded to this, but some of the work that Pheasants Forever is doing relative to helping farmers in Iowa and across the greater Corn Belt use their precision data to help identify opportunities for conservation. And that's additionally going to be showcasing and demonstrating that in some cases, alternatives other than corn and soybean production on some of those marginal red acres actually can improve profitability right alongside delivering some of those environmental benefits that Bryce and Miriam touched on, and things that, of course, everybody on this call is aware of, water quality and soil health benefits of perennial covers. I've only got about, I think, 80 slides here. So Don, good luck. I hope I don't put you to sleep. But I'm going to move pretty quick through this here. So we're going to have questions here later. And I guess I'm looking forward to some good discussion at the end. So again, I'm going to apologize because I'm going to move somewhat quickly through this. So, out of the gates, I guess we'll just, talk about Pheasants Forever and how it is that we're part of a conversation that involves, increased profitability on agricultural land in Iowa. Because, I think a lot of people think of, when they think of Pheasants Forever, they're thinking of, that annual banquet that the local chapter has, and there's prime rib dinner and raffle tickets. I guess that's not who we are. That's part of a fundraising tool to help us deliver our mission. And Habitat, is our mission. That's what we're after. Those fundraising events are just, again, a means for us to raise the capital we need to have an impact with Habitat. So here's our team. This is a map of our team here in Iowa. So this is our Habitat team, if you will. And of course, we got 10 Farm Bill wildlife biologists currently in the state. We started with 4 in 2009. And, we've grown up to the size of the program right now as a result of having some really great relationships with partners like Iowa NRCS and the Iowa Department of Agricultural and Land Stewardship. And our team is working right out of USDA service centers, delivering technical assistance for their customers there. And as you think about Habitat, I said we're the Habitat organization. What does Habitat look like in Iowa? In a state that's heavily agriculture. And what our staff, find quickly is that the overwhelming majority of the work that they're interacting with on the areas that our customers are looking for assistance with is in, problematic parts of the field. Bryce and Miriam both referenced some of those areas, whether they're flood prone, they're adjacent to timber, so not getting the sunlight or nutrients they need, just irregular shaped fields, or they're underlaid with sand and gravel. Well, where we fit into this and where I fit into this specifically is that ag technology helps take some of the guesswork out of where these problem parts of the field are. And that's through things using things like yield maps, which is what you're looking at there. And yield maps have been around for a long time now at this point, 20 plus years. And what's really neat about those is, again, they can be a valuable tool in helping to understand productivity and production within a field, not just at the field level. So about 6 years ago, some neat advancements started to occur with ag tech. And it was actually some tools that were moving yield map to something that was more actionable, more useful. And that was actually profitability map. So the image on the left is a yield map that's showing where the bushels are coming off of a field. What you're looking at on the right is that yield map coupled with its crop production budget. So green is still good, red is still bad as you look at that image on the right. But when you're looking at the red here, this is actually revenue negative. And I think in this spot of the field, it was just about $400 an acre negative revenue. So this part of the field is upside down. And what that helps us do, as we work with customers, is really understand where the best places in the field are to look at for conservation. Additionally, some of these same tools allow us to go back and kind of look at a hypothetical side-by-side what if scenarios. So in this same field, we're looking at the actual production profitability map, on the left. And on the right, as you can see in that northwest corner of that field, we've actually created a scenario with that data saying, well, what if that would have been, had a targeted enrollment in CRP? And as you can see, when we do that, the numbers tell us that would have improved the average yield of the rest of the field. It would have improved the profit by $10 an acre, and it would have improved the ROI for that grower. And all these things just help us ultimately decide and understand precisely where, down to the foot, where we're profitable and where we're not. So, as you get closer to those problematic spots, of course, you see the kind of the resulting shrinking yield, shrinking ear. And with precision data and a crop budget information, again, we can understand right where that line is, where we're revenue neutral and then revenue positive. And as we adopt this practice, this using precision ag data to identify opportunities for precision conservation, we've got some clear win-wins here. We know that we're improving profit ROI, actual production history on those acres left in production. We're minimizing our wasted capital on those parts of the field that aren't carrying their weight. And of course, I think everybody on this call understands all of the additional you call them secondary benefits, if you will, of perennial cover on a landscape. Those things, it's great for water quality, water quantity, soil health, and of course, wildlife habitat. That was kind of the genesis of Pheasants Forever kicking off their precision team, which I'm a part of. Started in Iowa in 2015. It's now expanded to multiple states. I think this map actually needs to add a couple more stars, as we've just hired a few more positions. So it's popular and it's growing, and people are interested in understanding more about how this can work. And it's through the same type of assistance that our Farm Bill wildlife biologists give. It's just specific to precision data. What's been really neat about this, as soon as we kind of kicked off working with customers like in this fashion, it really opened the door to us as far as partnerships. It allowed us to kind of expand existing partnerships that we have, and it also allowed us to work in new ways with new partners that we never had before. So this is a slide that is constantly growing that we're adding to, and that's a pretty exciting thing. So what I want to spend most of this time with is actually talking through an actual example of how this works, kind of from A to Z. And I just added this slide in here to make sure that I didn't forget just kind of some high-level overview stuff about precision conservation with Pheasants Forever. And there is no cost to this whatsoever to the producer. Again, that's made possible by partners that we have that are made my position possible. So the Iowa NRCS and Iowa Department of Agriculture and Land Stewardship. So there's no cost to anybody for having this done on their farm. There's no obligation that you have to do any management change whatsoever. All I'm sharing with people is more information about opportunities on their farm. So there's no requirement to enroll in any program or make any change. None of your precision ag data will be shared. That's strictly confidential with you. That's not something we do. And then one question that we get might look a little odd on there, but I ask this a lot. If you work with me, work with Pheasants Forever, and you choose to do something on your farm, that doesn't mean that project is open to public hunting whatsoever. That isn't. It's still private property, and that none of that changes. So now just to jump right into it. So we affectionately call this whole process, the working with farmers to turn red acres green. So step one is the fun part. Like Ben mentioned earlier, I cannot wait. I hope that 2021 is a more normal field season for me as well, because getting out on the farm and getting to meet people and, riding in a side by side and getting the understanding the operation a little bit better is like, the fun part of the job. So hope we get back to that. That's just understanding what the rotations are, understanding, what practices have been used in the past, understanding maybe the farmer's ideas for the lowest hanging fruit, if you will, on the part of the field that something can be done. So we start there, and then it's all about, learning more, getting more data. And that includes, some of that crop production information that I touched on earlier. So yield information, crop budget, bringing all those things together and overlaying those. That's how you get a clear picture of what's going on. Then connecting to the data used to be kind of tricky. Used to involve chasing somebody down with a thumb drive or a flash drive. It's a lot easier anymore because of a lot of the partnerships we have with some of the software providers. we're working pretty closely with John Deere Operations Center, Climate Field View, Granular Insights, Ag Leader SMS tools. So, and a lot of those tools have just partner sharing capabilities. So this part continues to get easier and easier for producers to share information with me. So here you are. We're in the John Deere Operations Center. This example is looking at the field you got here. This is a 2018 yield map. I've calibrated this legend so that you can see that the 55 bushels is the break even. So again, red is bad, green is good. It's showing what part of the fields are revenue negative here. Did the same thing with 2019 data for corn. You can see it was a lot more green in this year, but I guess take note of the southwest corner of that field there. What's worse than red in a yield map is nothing, and that's a result of that part of the field not producing a crop, either one of those 2 years. I always want to stress that I guess it's important to have as much data as possible as we go through this process. You don't want to look at any one given year. You try and get an average. So in this case with this tool, I can actually look at aggregated yield data. And again, that kind of glows red down in that southwest corner of the map here. And not surprisingly, since it was missing a couple of crop years. So this is the part of the field that this grower wanted to work on. Additionally, some of these tools let us actually kind of zoom in and take a closer look at that part of the field. And I apologize, some of those numbers are pretty small there. But the summary of that is that 23 and a half acres down in that part of the farm produced, a whopping 280 bushels of beans total. So if you apply the budget to that, that's a loss of just over $16,000. So not surprisingly, this customer, this is the part of the field that they wanted to learn more about the options with. So, the options here, and there's lots of options, and Joe is going to talk a little bit more about some of those options here later. So I'm pretty much going to skip this slide. The takeaway is just that there are a lot of options available. And then, one thing to talk about just briefly is that not all the options and the alternatives to make these areas more profitable have to be program. They don't have to be enrolled in any type of a program. There's a lot of people that choose to take this information and make some sort of a management change that's outside of a program whatsoever. Some of those have been like small grain production, folks that have taken some of these areas and maybe are producing cereal rye on those areas because it's a lower input crop and using that as their own cover crop seed. Also forage production, pasture if they got livestock. The metaphor I like to use, I guess, what I present to folks is it's a buffet of conservation options. And this goes back to the no obligation part that I mentioned earlier, but really all I'm sharing is information that's customized for their farm about what they could do. And then it's totally up to the customer to decide, what they have an appetite for. In this example, this customer had me look into the environmental quality incentives program. They were interested in a shorter term contract, and that's what this delivered. It's a 5-year contract. And they enrolled this part of the field into the Prairie Pothole Initiative. And in doing this, looking back at that one particular data year, this improved their ROI by 20% if you would have considered them enrolled in this program at that time. And they just got accepted into this program this summer. And like I mentioned before, we know all the benefits, the parts of the things that improve when we do this. And we know the things that we're, decreasing our risk, wasted capital, and we're lowering our break-even yield as we become more efficient as well. And then a fun part of this is kind of validating the management change, right? So here's another example, some red acres. I showed this earlier. These were drawn out, 2 or 3 years out of every 5 years. Worked with this customer to enroll 11 acres into CRP in this example, up in the northwest corner of the farm. You can see that there. encapsulated those problematic areas within the targeted enrollment. And then what was really cool about this is this is the yield map from 2017. So this is the first corn year after this project was enrolled. As a result of trimming the worst part of that field off, in 2017, this grower had the highest weighted corn yield that he's ever had on this field. As a result of doing this, 2017 was a good year. As you can see there, what I think was neat was that in 2019, when this field was corn again, 2019 was terribly wet. 2018, 2019 were pretty wet years. And this field, even in a really wet year, because the wettest part of the farm was, trimmed off, if you will, this had the second highest yield ever, even in a really wet year. There's a shot of it with those same problem areas filled with water again, but because it's enrolled in a program, they aren't losing money. And then, what I think is cool about this is that customer didn't enroll that part of the farm because he had any, wildlife habitat motivations whatsoever. It was strictly a financial business decision because it improved that farm by trimming that part off. But as all of us know, anytime you transition these areas into perennial cover, you're doing significant, you're adding a lot of value to wildlife habitat, pollinators, non-game species. And that's one of the really neat things that is an outcome of this. And of course, I'm never going to miss an opportunity to get a picture of my dogs out there. So, habitat like this is, of course, pretty neat in the fall when we're out chasing roosters. And just to remember, drive this home. There is no cost to this. There's no obligation. I put this slide in here intentionally so I would not forget to say it twice, just to make sure everybody is aware of that. And here's just a testimonial. I'll give you guys a few seconds to read this because I think it means a lot more coming from one of my customers and one of your guys' peers than it does coming from me. And I think that brings me to the end here. I do have some more, another example, I guess, if we have time, but I'll probably stop here and let Joe go. Or I guess take questions first.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. I think that was some good examples at showcasing just what a difference it can make having conservation on the land strategically. And I'm wondering if any of you guys had any questions that popped up in your head as you were listening to Josh or watching him go through these maps, just about what he does, the services that you can help with, or how you can implement this yourself. If you want, you can type those questions into the chat box, and then I can either have you read them off if you want to yourself, if you just want to unmute yourself and ask Josh what it is.
Sure. I do see a couple of questions that have come in. I'm going to roll up so I don't miss any. About availability within the state. So I'm up in Winnebago County. So again, forget the fact that I'm almost in Minnesota. I work with the entire state of Iowa. So like Bryce said earlier, I'm happy to hop in the truck and go for a drive. So if you guys, whether it's you yourself that are inquiring or anybody you might know, it's river to river and Minnesota to Missouri. There's a second question asking about any incentive programs available specifically through Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever. I guess the answer to that is going to be yes. We just rolled out here this last year a new program called the Soil Health and Habitat Program. That program was made possible through Purina. That one is targeted specifically to the prairie pothole region. So it only goes down to kind of central Iowa, not all the way down to the entire state. But that program, we've just had our second sign up period. There will be a third. It takes, part of that program is doing this precision analysis and then finding those red acres. And then there are some financial incentives for those customers to transition some of those red acres to a perennial cover. That's a 5-year contract. And I can share more information with anybody that would like to learn more about that. So reach out and I'll send you some more information.
That's good. I'm seeing a couple more questions come in. This next one is from Brooke. I was wondering if hunting access is a requirement for working with packs.
Right. So that was one of the slides that I just added into this presentation just to make sure I didn't forget it. So no, there is no, access obligation. There's no hunting obligation whatsoever. Pheasants Forever just functions as a technical assistance provider here. So that private land that gets, potentially enrolled into a program is still protected by all the rights that, private property have. So there certainly is no given access for hunting as a result of working with me. But it's good thanks for asking. It's good to reinforce that.
Yep. So we have 2 more questions and then we'll move on. So first one from Sarah is, can you share some additional examples of alternative management solutions that you have recommended in the past with producers?
Sure. Most solutions that I've worked with have ended up, being the customers chose to target those red acres for enrollment into a farm bill program. So whether that be CRP or the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, EQIP, like I mentioned, I have had some folks that have gone with that Pheasants Forever program that I just mentioned, the Soil Health and Habitat Program. But I haven't yet worked with anyone that has gone the route of, doing like a forage production or a pasture conversion. I've got coworkers in Minnesota and the Dakotas that certainly see a lot more of that. It just seems like, there's less livestock producers in Iowa than there once were. And I would love to work on some scenarios like that. So if you guys are thinking that'd be something you'd like to learn more about, hit me up and I'd be happy to help. And then I can answer that question. I have a better answer for that question next time.
That's good. Yeah, it's easier to have a solution when you know kind of what the system is that the producer is working on and what their goals are and what they're wanting to do. Last question here from Miriam. Which kind of yield maps or data can you work with?
Basically everything. So, it doesn't matter. We like to say that, our precision program is colorblind and non-denominational. So, doesn't matter if somebody's got red tractors or green. I'm happy to work with any and all of those software platforms. So it can be in the yield data, I guess, yield data is pretty straightforward. But we work with a whole bunch of different platforms and I'm happy to work with whatever software platform the customer themselves are already working with. So that's been really neat where I can meet them with the system they're already using. But yeah, yield data is really important. In the absence of yield data, we can do some stuff with plant health imagery. So historical plant health imagery called like NDVI. So we can understand kind of some plant, pull some of that stuff in to understand how parts of the field are performing without that. I mean, soil maps are also helpful. So is LiDAR maps. So yield data is just how we get the most rock solid profitability output, but there's lots of different tools to pull into it as we're kind of evaluating a field.
All right. Cool. For the sake of time, we're going to have to keep moving. I see some more questions coming in, and if we have a little bit more time at the end, we'll come back to those. But if you want to contact Josh directly, Miriam posted his email address in the chat. So you can reach out to Josh if you're interested in working with him. And next, I want to bring it over to Joe, who is he's had a lot of experience. He's a district conservationist, and just knows a lot about the different programs through multiple entities that are available. And he's just going to talk about what kind of financial technical assistance is available that's relative to what Josh just talked about. So, Joe.
Okay, flattered by the introduction. In reality, I know just enough to get me into trouble, and that's about it. So my presentation, if I can get my screen shared here. Okay, I hope that's working. Everybody see the slide up, says practices, programs, and cost share.
You got it, Joe.
All
Yes,
right.
we do.
So I could literally spend a couple days just talking about our conservation practices and our programs. So this is going to be a very brief introduction, just kind of general background about what we do with practices, what our programs are, and then I'm going to go into some explanation of cost share. As Bryce said, my name is Joe Dixon. I'm the district conservationist. I'm actually the district conservationist for NRCS in Williamsburg. Prior to that, I was the DC in Iowa City, and I'm currently the acting district conservationist here in Oskaloosa. Kevin Funai, the DC here for many, many years, retired recently, so I'm temporarily covering his position until a new DC is hired. So to get into my presentation here, the first thing is, well, what is a conservation practice? That's a term obviously we throw around a lot, and lots of people have different ideas of what to do for conservation, of what to put on the land. I'm sure if you ask the Fish and Wildlife Service or the DNR what a conservation practice is, they would have their own concept. Well, with NRCS, what we're talking about is a conservation practice is a defined management activity or a physical structure that's completed or installed on the land to solve a resource concern. So conservation practices for us have specific names, they have specific definitions, and they have specific criteria, which I'll get into in more a little bit. And one big thing with a conservation practice is we use it to solve a resource concern problem. Well, what's a resource concern? A resource concern is an environmental problem that needs to be addressed. And the key there is that it's an environmental problem. I'll give you an example. A situation that comes up in our field offices quite often is people coming in and they would like assistance for a pond because they want a place to fish. Well, not having enough places to go fishing is not an environmental problem. That's a personal recreational problem. So situations like that is not a resource concern. It's not eligible for our programs. So basically, we use conservation practices to address some kind of environmental problem, whether it's soil erosion, lack of wildlife habitat, air quality, water quality, etc. Another thing to keep in mind with conservation practices is not all practices can solve all resource concerns. Occasionally, we will get people that have an idea of a conservation practice they want to do. We'll go to the farm and look, and what they want to do really will not fix the problem they have. And so we'd have to recommend a different conservation practice. That can kind of be avoided with the stuff that Josh was talking about, since he works with people that try and recommend conservation practices. But that's also something to keep in mind, that not all practices can solve all resource concern problems. Conservation practices do have requirements, as I mentioned. We have standards and specifications for these practices, and they have to be met to be eligible for cost share. To give you an example, if somebody came in and received cost share to plant some native grasses for wildlife habitat, we have a standard that defines how many seeds per square feet of seed they have to have. So somebody couldn't just go out on their own and throw seed out by hand and say, okay, I planted it, pay me. They have to meet our standards and specs. And because of that, we will provide people with seeding plans, engineering designs, other designs, So we know that what is being installed out there for that conservation practice meets our requirements. Another thing with practice requirements is NRCS is dictated by federal policy that we should only be installing the practices that are the most efficient use of taxpayer dollars. I can actually tell you a personal story on this. When I was working in another county, I had a gentleman come in that had a huge area with erosion, and he wanted a pond to stop all the water and stop the erosion. Well, it would have been a 7-acre pond. And when we got to looking at it, yeah, a pond would have worked, but a better use of taxpayer dollars was to put in new waterways. So I had to tell him, sure, we'll provide cost share, but only for waterways, not for the pond, because the pond was not the best use of taxpayer dollars. Obviously, he wanted the pond for a reason. He wanted a fishing hole, but that's an example that the practices have to be spent, has to be a wise use of taxpayer dollars with cost share for these practices. The other thing with conservation practices to keep in mind is that they all do have a maintenance requirement. That requirement varies from 1 to up to 20 years. There might even be some that are more than 20 years. I'd have to look off the top of my head. I can't think of any. But that maintenance requirement is depending on what kind of conservation practice we assist with, we expect it to remain there for a certain number of years. The 20 years, for example, tree planting has a maintenance agreement of 20 years. I believe it's 20, it might be 15, but it's over a decade for sure. And the reason for that is if we provided cost share for a tree planting conservation practice, and then 2 years later you decided, well, I don't like those trees there, I'm going to bulldoze them out, we would want the cost share money back. As part of the conservation practice, you're agreeing to keep it, or as part of the cost share agreement, you're agreeing to keep that conservation practice there for that maintenance requirement for that many years. And I think I mentioned this, but those years vary depending on what the practice is. So just some examples of conservation practices. These are some of the most common ones: grassed waterway, terraces, field borders, filter strips. I'm not going to read through all these, but these are typical ones we see in Iowa, but there are actually many, many more. To be honest, I've never totaled up how many practices we have in Iowa, but I would guess it's probably around 100. So there are many different kinds of conservation practices to address many different issues in Iowa. Something else I'd like to point out quick is on the list, you see no-till as an option. Well, this goes back to what I said about our practices having standards and specifications. NRCS has a defined definition of what constitutes no-till, and we have specifications that have to be met if somebody were to get cost share for no-till. And our specifications may not match what other people think is no-till. And the way I like to explain that to people is, just because the farm implement dealer tells you that using this tool is going to make it no-till doesn't mean they're right, because what that implement dealer thinks is no-till might be different from what our standards are. So just because one person says it's an NRCS conservation practice or it's going to meet our standards doesn't necessarily mean it's true. You should always check with your local NRCS office, especially if you're going to get cost share for it. Well, my slide's not moving forward. There it goes. So what is a cost share program? Very simply, it's a government program that uses taxpayer dollars to provide financial assistance for putting conservation on private land. NRCS is a division or an agency of the United States Department of Agriculture, and we are the only federal natural resource agency that does conservation exclusively on private land. Other agencies do have programs that help, like Fish and Wildlife, Forest Service, etc. But the difference is those agencies own their own properties that they manage. They're national forests, they're wildlife refuges. NRCS, we do not own any properties. We do not manage any government properties. We exclusively exist to help private landowners put conservation on their property. And that is what our programs are for. So cost share programs, there's actually two main sources. There are programs to the state and programs to the federal government. The state programs, the funding is provided by the state of Iowa. Obviously, if you're in another state, it'd be that state. And in Iowa, the funding is distributed from the Iowa Department of Agriculture and Land Stewardship, and they distribute that money out to each county, and then each county's local soil and water conservation district administers that state program cost share. So the different state programs, if you were to apply for those, you would do it through your local soil and water conservation district. Federal programs, the money is obviously provided by the United States government, and it's distributed out to the states through the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and it's administered. I actually have on the slide by your local Natural Resources Conservation Service, but there are other USDA agencies too, like Farm Service Agency administered CP or CRP, for example. But basically, so some of that federal money comes to federal offices in your county, and then that's who administers that money in that area. There are other cost share programs that exist that are more specialized. Bryce and Miriam's watersheds are a perfect example. Bryce mentioned in his watershed that they do, I think it was saturated buffers. He said 100% of the funds are paid for with their cost share. That would be a special program for that watershed. So these general state and federal programs I'm mentioning here, they're the same throughout the state of Iowa, but you may have circumstances in different counties where a local watershed or a local special project has different cost share rates. Another one I can think of, for example, is the Clear Creek Watershed Project over in Iowa and Johnson counties. They pay 90% cost share for installing ponds, for example. And they do ponds that it would be considered recreational ponds. So that's more of an exception to the rule. So there are other special programs that could pay different rates and cover different things. But as a general rule, most programs would fall into either the state or federal and would be the same throughout each county. So some examples of some of those programs, state programs, we have REAP, Resource Enhancement and Protection. There's IFIP, Iowa Financial Incentives Program. Federal programs, examples of that, obviously would be CRP, a very popular one. And then EQIP, Environmental Quality Incentive that Josh mentioned, is another example. And then federal programs, we also have easement programs, the Agricultural Easement Program, which now encompasses what used to be called WRP, the Wetland Reserve. So we actually have, through that, a federal program where we can actually take land out of production permanently and put a permanent easement on it to restore it to wetland or grassland. So what is cost share? This is kind of the gist of my presentation here, just because I think cost share even can be confusing for our employees sometimes when they're new, and it's definitely confusing for the public. So what is it? Well, cost share in simplest terms is when the government shares the cost of installing conservation practices for the public good. The idea behind it is if we help stop erosion on John Doe's farm, we are improving water quality for the rest of us because whatever's running off his farm is not getting into the water supply. If we provide wildlife habitat on Jane Doe's farm, you know, even people who don't hunt and fish like seeing wildlife. So again, we're providing a public good. So that's the purpose for cost share, to install conservation to benefit everybody. One thing with the term cost share is it's not used as much anymore. You might hear it be called financial assistance. I'll be honest, I still call it cost share because that's how I learned it when I first started working for the agency, but there has been kind of a push to call it financial assistance instead of cost share. So you might hear that term used sometimes. In the past, the rule of thumb was that it was 50%, which is why they kind of called it cost share. 50% was paid by the landowner, 50% was paid by the government. That rule isn't 100% true anymore. And what I mean by that is all cost share programs today, whether they're state or federal, have maximum rates, and they're sometimes referred to as a not to exceed rate. So because of that, 50% of the cost is not always a guarantee. And I'll explain this more in the next few slides here. If you ever use a cost share program, you are told upfront how much we would pay, with the agency, the program, whatever. So you are told the not to exceed rate or the maximum allowable rate. before you sign any type of contract or agreement. You never go into a blind. We never say, okay, do your project and we'll tell you later what we're going to pay. We tell you up front, we will pay X amount for this project. So typically, the payment you would receive for cost share is 50% of the actual cost, but not if it's above that not to exceed rate. And I have an example that kind of explains how this works. So you have three farmers, Tom, Dick, and Harry. They're all neighbors, and they all apply for assistance to build a waterway. And just as luck would have it, all three of their waterways, each waterway is exactly the same. So they sign up for the same program and are told that each program will give them $3,000 total for the waterway. So that's the not to exceed rate. They can't get any more than $3,000 for their waterways. Each of them signs a contract with the local NRCS office saying that the waterway will meet our specifications. So Farmer Tom goes out and he gets 3 different bids. Goes to 3 different contractors and gets a bid from each. And the bids come in at $7,000, $6,500, and $6,000. Well, he knows that the most cost share he would get is $3,000. So he hires the contractor who does the job for $6,000. The job's done correctly, it meets our specs. So Farmer Tom pays the contractor and we reimburse Tom $3,000. Just like the cost share agreement said, he's only had to pay 50% and we paid the other 50. Well, Farmer Dick, he's got a best friend who owns an earth moving contracting business. And he says, Dick, I'll do that waterway for you for only $4,000. I heard that Tom paid $6,000, well, I'll do it for only $4,000. Well, Dick thinks that's a great idea. So his friend does the job and he only charges him $4,000. So he brings in his bills, we pay $2,000 of that. Again, we said we would go up to $3,000, but it's 50% of the actual cost. So that's why Dick gets $2,000 instead of $3,000. But even with that, since he got the same job done at less than his friend Tom, he still came out ahead. He only paid $2,000 for the waterway, and then we paid the other $2,000. Well, poor Harry. Harry's got a brother-in-law who just bought his own bulldozer. And his brother-in-law is very inexperienced and doesn't know what he's doing, but he says, well, I'll give him a chance, and he hires his brother-in-law. Well, at the end, to finally get it to meet spec, it ends up costing Harry $12,000. Well, guess what? Harry's only going to get $3,000 because that was that not to exceed rate that they were told up front. So in the end, Harry would only get 25% cost share because the actual project ended up costing him way more than the not to exceed rate that he had been told. The last slide I had, and then I think I saw some questions popping up in chat. But the last slide I had that I wanted to point out was one thing with cost share too to keep in mind is when I haven't seen this recently in my career, so maybe I've gotten better at this, I don't know. But I did encounter people early in my career a few times that when they got a cost share agreement, they thought the amount listed on the cost share agreement was how much the project was going to cost. Whatever cost share agreement you get from us, the amount listed is how much is that maximum amount I told you that we would pay. It's not how much the project would cost. We can provide, or we do provide estimates of a cost with our engineers, but in the end, it's up to the landowner to hire the contractor to get the bids, to get the estimates, to get a total cost. We don't tell you that. So just keep that in mind. Whatever amount is listed on a cost share agreement is the maximum amount that you would get paid from us, not how much the actual project is going to cost you. Let's see, stop sharing, there it is.
Oops. Oh, thank you, Joe. That was, yeah, I've been working with an RCS and in conservation for almost a year now, and it's always good to have a refresher. So the world of conservation practices and cost share programs is very confusing. So usually when I tell people, usually when I tell people, I tell people, if you have a problem, an issue, you have a conservation project, just come see us and we'll try to find the best project for you, the best program for you.
Yes. Actually, I'm glad you brought that up. That is something I should have mentioned. I mentioned that not all practices meet all resource concerns, and sometimes maybe we would recommend a practice that is not what the person originally came in wanting. Cost share programs are the same way. Different programs pay different rates for different practices. Different programs have different maximum limits for how much you can enroll. So I don't think in most circumstances, it would be unwise to come in and just say, well, I want to do this program and nothing else. It's more along the lines of, this is the resource concern I want to address, and we can help you as the landowner pick out the best program to meet your needs.
Yeah, I agree. Hey, we have a few questions here for you, Joe.
Good.
Ace would like to know if you have any favorite conservation practices and that you find really interesting, exciting. And she also asking if there are any practices that you wish that landowners or producers would implement more frequently across Iowa landscape.
Personally, my favorites are filter strips and riparian buffers. And part of the reason for that is it's always bothered me if you see farming done all the way up to the edge of a creek or stream. I was on a canoe trip years ago, and I can't even remember what river we were on, but somebody had farmed all the way up to the bank of the river, and you could see the corn stalks laying down at the slope of the bank because the bank just kept eroding away and his corn would fall into the field. That really left a bad taste in my mouth. So I've always preferred filter strips and riparian buffers. And then also the other reason I've always liked those is because when you install enough of those, it helps create wildlife habitat corridors. So I kind of think they do double duty, both wildlife and soil erosion. Practices that I find interesting or exciting, I would say they're all interesting or exciting. Because it really depends on what the resource concern is. Sometimes you get lucky and you can try something new, but.
Now, Adam would like to know if he can receive equipped financial assistance for a practice that he's already implemented.
No, actually, no cost share program will pay for a practice that you have already completed yourself. The rules of those programs are that you have to apply and be awarded the agreement or contract before you can do anything. There are special circumstances where you could start early after you've applied. For example, we had special EQIP funding after the derecho went through, and people could request a waiver to start doing repairs from the derecho damage before the contract was awarded. But those are special circumstances. In most cases, you can't get any type of payment for something you've already done.
Okay, since we're talking about the EQIP program, Miranda would like to know if she can cancel her EQIP contract if she changed her mind later.
Yes, you're always free to cancel a contract. However, there are some caveats to that. The EQIP contract is exactly what it says. It's a contract with the federal government that you are going to do these conservation practices, and in exchange, we will help pay part of the cost of this. And since it's a contract, there can be penalties if you don't fulfill the contract or if you back out of it. So you can cancel it, but there may be a penalty depending on the reasons for the cancellation. If it's reasons beyond your control, a death in the family, a bankruptcy or something horrible like that, chances are you would be let out of it without penalty. If you decided to come in and cancel it because you just changed your mind and decided you didn't want to do it anymore, you can still cancel it, but you may have to pay a penalty as part of that cancellation. And that penalty is because of all the work that the government did in setting up that contract and doing all the design work, etc.
Yeah, there's a lot of work behind that.
Yeah.
It's probably worth mentioning that there is no problem with canceling an application at
Correct.
in time. So there is, it's never a dangerous thing to apply for something that you're potentially interested in. And then you'll get an opportunity to cancel it before you sign your formal contract. So just there's
Correct. And actually,
distinction there.
correct, yes. And actually, I'll even elaborate on that distinction. You are not obligated to anything until you sign the actual contract. So you can, up until the moment you sign your name, you can decide, no, I don't want to do this and walk away. And I've personally had a situation, waterway project was going to be very expensive, even with the cost share. And the day he came in for the appointment to sign the contract, he sat there for 20 minutes and then finally said, I've changed my mind. I'm not going to do this. I'm not prepared to pay for this yet. So yeah, there's no, I mean, it was disappointing to me, but there's no penalty. There's nothing wrong with that. So until you sign the contract, you can back out at any time. There's no requirements. And you can apply as often as you want. It's just once that contract is signed, then you've committed to that basically.
Okay, that's clear. And Katrina, she has a really good question. She's asking if you can enroll land into conservation program that she farms, but she doesn't own. So let's say you rent, for example.
Yes, you can. There is, depending on the program, all the programs have it, but there's a different form that you'd have to fill out depending on the program, which basically the landowner would sign acknowledging that they're aware that you are enrolling in this program on their land. But yes, you can do that. Well, you can do that assuming the landowner is willing to sign that form.
Okay.
That's pretty common. So that's a
I've never,
form. Yeah.
Josh, have you ever encountered a situation where a landowner didn't want to sign that form? I never have. I've always, I mean, it's pretty common practice.
Right. Even the form that they do sign doesn't mean that they can't. It doesn't hold the tenant to the landowner or anything of that nature. So yeah, it's never been a barrier. You just have to kind of explain it to both parties.
Okay, it's good to know. We have sometimes, we have a little bit more time, so we're gonna go back to some questions that were for Josh. Chris would like to know, he's asking, with all the flavors of lease arrangement, how do you go about calculating profitability impact for both the landowner and producer?
Sure, that's a great question. So, I mean, yeah, the work that I do, it largely is dependent upon who I'm working with. You know, if I'm working with a farmer who is also the owner, so an owner operator, or if it's a situation of you know, the question that was just asked was if it was a tenant on rented ground. So in most cases, over half of land in Iowa, I think it's close to 60% of farmland in Iowa is cash rented on an annual basis, you know. So those are pretty straightforward to work with because we know what the expected rent payment is for that farm, because we know you know what the annual rate is and the acres. And then we can do the profitability on the farmer side of things. But yeah, I frequently am working with both landowner and tenant. And I think, you know, with the precision tools and doing the profitability analysis, it helps people identify the parts of, you know, they've got common ground, right? The farmer doesn't have any interest in continuing to pay rent on a part of the farm that isn't, you know, they're not able to produce a revenue on. And in lots of cases, those are environmentally sensitive parts of the farm. So when you do the profitability, when you run the numbers, it helps zero in on those parts of the farm that maybe could and should be, you know, under different management. And then we can determine, you know, what if they're going to enroll into a program, what the program payment might be. And I've worked on several cases where we've taken the worst of the worst red acres, enrolled that into a program, and then the tenant is happy in some of those cases to pay a higher premium on the cash rent for the part of the farm that stays in crop production, because it just instantly became a better farm, right? If you think about it as a weighted average, it's got a higher CSR2, it's got less risk, and in that case, that can offset sometimes a little bit lower income on what those conservation acres might be. So we can run the analysis and show that in some cases the landowner income stays flat, and in some cases, because of those two variables, the landowner can end up making a little bit more money and making sure that farm's a little bit more sustainable. But yeah, as you get into like crop share agreements and stuff, all that stuff can be, you can tabulate all of that out, and you can determine what inputs are and what revenue is, and that allows, I guess, the landowner and the tenant to have a conversation about meeting in the middle somewhere.
Okay, that makes sense. So yeah, it can be a win-win situation for sure. Hayes, and I'm sorry if I don't pronounce your name properly. I feel that I'm not saying that properly. Anyway, Hayes is asking, do you typically work with 1 year's yield map, or do you prefer to work with many years of yield data? Would having more data influence your recommendations?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I really I try to shy away from making recommendations on just 1 year of data. As you think about our weather patterns, just even in the last 5 years, they've been all over the place. So the more years of data that I can pull into the analysis, I think the clearer the picture gets, because instead of some of these highs and lows and in moisture and temperature, it's more representative of an average, whatever average weather is in Iowa. But yeah, I think and some of the tools actually can aggregate some of the agronomic performance and the profitability across a full data set. So once again, it's you're pulling in 5 to 10 years of data instead of 1 or 2. Just it firms up, I think, the output. So absolutely is my preference. I was just working with someone this morning that had yield data all the way back to 2010. So I'm happy to pull that into the system.
Okay, I think I have this is a question more for Joe, maybe. Corey would like to know if you can stack different programs to get more financial assistance. So let's say you want to put ground in CRP. Can I have South Kong, Watershed, Pheasants Forever, and RCS all go together on it for cost sharing for different practices?
So the Pheasants Forever is a private organization. So any money that they wanted to put towards it would be up to them. And I mean, that wouldn't involve us. Combining CRP and other cost share with like the state or NRCS, that is sometimes possible. You can piggyback some programs together, but there's usually got to be some special circumstances with it. For example, some of the state programs that are administered by the local soil and water district, you can combine those with, say, EQIP to go up to 75% cost share. However, typically the local soil and water district has to approve that, and there has to be justification of why you want to combine them. So yes, it's possible, but I can't guarantee that it would be applicable to every circumstance.
So I can tell that for my project, we did a wetland in the Michiknook watershed, and we got funding from EQIP, and we completed with the Michiknook funding. So in that case, the landowner got 100% of the cost of installing that wetland on the ground. So it's possible sometimes.
Yes, it's definitely possible. When I was the DC in Johnson County, we had a massive waterway project. This individual had just a huge amount of ground in this watershed. It wasn't even a watershed project. It was just in that area. This farmer had a huge amount of ground, did a huge watershed or waterway project. I can't even remember how many acres of waterways he put in. And it was an EQIP contract. And because of how massive the project was, he requested additional funding through IFIP to get it up to 75%. And the commissioners agreed because it was going to have such a huge impact. I know in another county I worked in, somebody asked for the same thing for just one little 30-foot by 1-foot waterway, and the commissioner said no, because the only thing it's going to impact is just your farm. So yeah, it's always possible. Whether or not it gets approved just depends on the circumstances.
Sorry, I'm
No,
looking at other questions.
is there-
I see that Corey just asked a question about
Yes.
leasing out to PF, and yeah, just kind of piggybacking what Joe had just said about the stacking of programs. Yeah, there's opportunities sometimes to have state assistance, piggyback on federal or federal on state, but you can never do federal or state. So, and I think I'm going to relate this to that question. So, as far as the leasing of, say habitat that was enrolled through a conservation, a program like CRP, to lease it out to PF. For starters, Pheasants Forever isn't involved at all in any leasing of private ground for access. We do have a lot of interest in public access, but that's through supporting larger state programs like voluntary public access program. And I guess if someone was willing to lease out their private ground for hunting, I guess one program that I'll throw a plug in for would be the Iowa DNR has a program called the Iowa Habitat and Access Program. So this fits into the stacking of programs. So that program actually has opportunities to come in and provide additional cost share for, say, someone that whether they have existing CRP, or the best case is usually for a new CRP enrollment, where they'll come in and provide additional cost share to get that CRP established. And that's in exchange for public hunting access. So that's a program that the Iowa DNR administers. So if that's something that somebody is interested in, I'd have them reach out to one of the Pheasants Forever staff or the DNR biologist in that part of the world, and there's probably some opportunities for them.
We had a lot of good questions today. So thank you guys for typing into that chat box and making there be as much interaction as possible on a virtual field day. I feel good about this, and I just have one more thing for you guys. I'm posting a follow-up survey in the chat, and it just has a link to it. And if you could just click on that and fill out the survey, it'll help us know what things were good about it, what things we can improve on for next time, so that it can just make the experience even more smooth for you next time. A couple other things while you're clicking on that link, I'm going to tell you the winner of the Watershed t-shirt was Ashley Armstrong. So woohoo, go Ashley. I will be in contact with you about how or where we can ship that t-shirt to. But other than that, Joe, Josh, thank you for packing a lot of information into a short amount of time. You guys had quite the challenge today of covering the topics that you guys did. And so you did a great job. Thank you to that. Thanks NRCS, Pheasants Forever, Iowa Corn, Idols for making this possible.
Thank you, you guys for organizing it.
Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. Well, that concludes our field day. Thank you everybody for sticking on.